From drinking tea like it's a national emergency, to chasing cheese down hills and standing politely in queues longer than some wars, Britain has turned ordinary habits into legendary traditions. But where did these strange customs come from, and why are we still doing them today?
There are many symbols associated with Britain. Red telephone boxes, royal guards, rainy weather, and apologising to furniture after accidentally walking into it. But towering above them all is tea. Not simply a drink, not merely a beverage, but a national institution so deeply woven into British life that many people genuinely believe a cup of tea can solve almost any problem. Bad day? Have a cup of tea. Good day? Have a cup of tea. House on fire? Call the fire brigade and put the kettle on. To understand Britain's relationship with tea, you first have to appreciate that it borders on the irrational. Tea is offered in moments of celebration, grief, confusion, boredom, stress, happiness, awkwardness, and complete panic. If aliens landed tomorrow, there is a strong possibility someone would greet them by asking, "Fancy a cuppa?" Tea first arrived in Britain during the 17th century. Originally imported from China, it was a luxury product available only to the wealthy. Drinking tea was considered fashionable and sophisticated, particularly after Catherine of Braganza, the Portuguese wife of Charles II, introduced her love of tea to the English court. Before long, aristocrats were sipping tea while discussing matters of great importance and occasionally pretending they understood what it tasted like. At first, tea was astonishingly expensive. It was stored under lock and key in wealthy households, treated with the sort of security usually reserved for jewels. Owning tea signalled status and wealth. Fortunately for tea lovers, Britain soon developed global trade networks that made tea increasingly available to the wider population. By the 18th century, tea consumption had exploded. Smuggling became widespread because high taxes made legal tea expensive. Entire criminal enterprises emerged around secretly importing tea into Britain. History is full of glamorous tales of pirates, gold, and treasure. Britain naturally responded by creating organised tea smuggling gangs. The rise of the East India Company helped transform tea into a truly national drink. Imports increased dramatically, prices gradually fell, and tea spread across every level of society. Rich or poor, urban or rural, people increasingly shared the same daily habit. The Industrial Revolution cemented tea's place in British culture. Factory workers needed cheap, warm drinks and regular breaks during long working hours. Tea provided comfort, warmth, and a small moment of respite during demanding days. The tea break soon became a cherished part of British working life, and many workplaces still treat it with a level of seriousness normally reserved for international diplomacy. By the Victorian era, tea had become inseparable from British identity. Afternoon tea emerged among the upper classes, while ordinary families enjoyed tea throughout the day. Special tea sets, teapots, cups, saucers and elaborate rituals developed around serving it. Britain had effectively elevated boiling leaves in water into an art form. Then came one of the great British debates: how to make tea properly. This subject has generated more arguments than politics in some households. Should the milk go in first or last? How long should the tea brew? How strong should it be? Is sugar acceptable? Entire friendships have survived major disagreements, but somehow become strained over tea-making techniques. The phrase, "put the kettle on," became one of the most comforting sentences in the English language. It signals hospitality, friendship and support. Visitors arriving unexpectedly are often greeted with an offer of tea before they have even removed their coats. In many homes, refusing tea can create mild confusion, as if rejecting a fundamental law of nature. Tea also acquired almost magical status during times of crisis. During both world wars, tea was considered so important to national morale that the British government worked hard to maintain supplies. Even during periods of rationing, tea remained a priority. The message seemed clear. Civilization could endure many hardships, but running out of tea was apparently not one of them. Different styles of tea drinking evolved over time. Builders developed a reputation for drinking strong tea capable of reviving the dead. Office workers perfected the communal tea round. Grandparents became experts in producing tea and biscuits within seconds of a visitor crossing the threshold. Somewhere in Britain, there is always someone making tea for a group of people without writing down a single order, and somehow remembering exactly who takes 2 sugars. Tea even influences language. People don't just drink tea, they have a cuppa. Problems can be discussed over a cup of tea. Difficult conversations often begin with, "Let's have a cup of tea and talk about it." In Britain, tea functions as both a beverage and a social strategy. Modern Britain has embraced coffee culture, energy drinks and countless alternatives, yet tea remains remarkably resilient. Millions of cups are still consumed every day. Kettles remain among the hardest working appliances in the country. Offices still pause for tea breaks. Families still gather around kitchen tables with mugs in hand. Perhaps the secret of tea's enduring popularity is that it represents something larger than the drink itself. Tea means comfort. It means routine. It means taking a moment to pause in a busy world. It means hospitality, conversation, and connection. And perhaps that is why tea remains Britain's national drink. Because when life becomes complicated, uncertain, or stressful, the British response remains reassuringly simple. Sit down, put the kettle on, and let the tea do what centuries of tradition suggest it somehow can.
There are few smells more unmistakably British than the scent of hot vinegar hitting freshly fried fish and chips on a rainy Friday evening. Across Britain, from seaside towns to city high streets, generations have stood in queues, clutching coins, waiting for steaming parcels wrapped in paper, while trying not to burn their fingers on molten chips. Fish and chips is not just food in Britain, it is practically an emotional support system with salt on top. But strangely enough, one of Britain's most famous meals owes part of its survival to religion. The tradition of eating fish on Fridays dates back many centuries to Christian customs, particularly within the Catholic Church. In medieval Europe, Christians were encouraged to avoid eating meat on Fridays as an act of penance, marking the day believed to be the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Fish, however, was allowed, and since Britain is surrounded by water and packed with fishing communities, fish quickly became the obvious alternative. Over time, Friday fish dinners became deeply embedded in British life. Long before takeaway shops existed, families would prepare simple fish meals at home every Friday almost automatically, like a national reflex. Somewhere along the line, Britain collectively decided, if we're eating fish anyway, we may as well deep fry it. The fish and chip shop itself was born during the 19th century, right in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. Britain's growing factory cities were packed with workers needing cheap, filling meals after exhausting shifts. Fried fish had likely arrived with Jewish immigrants from Spain and Portugal, while chipped potatoes were becoming popular in northern England. Eventually, some genius looked at the two and thought, these belong together. History was never the same again. Nobody agrees exactly where the first fish and chip shop opened. London claims it, Manchester claims it. Somewhere in Britain, two Victorian men are probably still arguing about it in the afterlife over a battered cod. What is certain is how quickly fish and chips conquered the country. By the late 1800s, fish and chip shops, or chippies, as the British lovingly call them, were everywhere. They became a lifeline for working-class families because they were cheap, hot and filling. In fact, during both World Wars, fish and chips became one of the few foods not heavily rationed by the British government. Leaders feared that taking away the nation's fish supper might cause complete societal collapse. Frankly, they may have been right. Friday nights soon became unofficial fish and chip nights across Britain. After a long week of work or school, families would head to the local chippy as a treat. Children would stand outside desperately trying to steal chips before getting home, despite being told for the 1000th time, don't touch them, they're too hot. Naturally, this warning was ignored nationwide. The meal itself became a ritual: thick-cut chips, crispy battered cod or haddock, salt shaken from absurd heights, vinegar poured on with terrifying confidence. Some regions added mushy peas, curry sauce, gravy or scraps, the crunchy leftover batter bits that somehow look alarming, yet taste fantastic. In northern England, asking whether gravy belongs on chips can still start arguments capable of ending friendships. Then there is the great British seaside connection. For generations, no trip to the coast felt complete without fish and chips, eaten outdoors, while aggressively defending them from seagulls the size of military drones. Entire childhood memories in Britain consist of sitting on cold sea walls with vinegar-soaked chips, while one furious bird circles overhead, planning theft. Despite changing diets, takeaway apps and endless fast food chains, fish and chips remains one of Britain's defining comfort foods. The Friday tradition still survives in homes, pubs and chippies across the country. For many people, it carries nostalgia as much as flavour. Memories of family evenings, newspaper wrappings, seaside holidays, and the simple joy of eating something gloriously unhealthy at the end of a long week. Because deep down, Britain knows an important truth. Some problems in life cannot be solved by fish and chips, but it's still probably worth trying.
If Britain has ever found an excuse to celebrate the arrival of spring with ribbons, flowers, dancing, music, and occasionally people dressed as mythical woodland creatures, it is May Day. Held on or around the 1st of May, this ancient tradition marks the arrival of warmer weather and longer days after a long British winter. After months of grey skies, cold mornings, and everyone insisting, "It's not that bad," May Day arrives as the nation's cheerful reminder that sunshine might eventually make an appearance. May Day is one of Britain's oldest surviving seasonal celebrations, with roots stretching back thousands of years. Long before modern calendars, people depended on the changing seasons for farming, food, and survival. The arrival of spring meant crops could be planted, animals returned to the fields, and life became just a little easier. Naturally, this seemed like an excellent reason to hold a celebration. Many historians believe May Day has its origins in ancient pagan festivals that welcomed fertility, new life, and the return of summer. One of the most important of these was Beltane, celebrated by the ancient Celts in what is now Scotland, Ireland, and parts of northern England. Huge bonfires were lit on hilltops, and people believed the fires offered protection for livestock and encouraged a successful growing season. As Christianity spread throughout Britain, many older customs were adapted rather than abandoned. Over the centuries, May Day evolved into a colourful mixture of ancient traditions, local customs, village festivities, and family celebrations. While the original meanings sometimes faded, the spirit of welcoming spring remained remarkably strong. Perhaps the best-known symbol of May Day is the maypole. Standing proudly in village greens and school playgrounds across Britain, the maypole is a tall wooden pole decorated with colourful ribbons and flowers. Children and dancers each hold a ribbon and perform carefully choreographed movements, weaving intricate patterns around the pole. At least, that is the plan. For spectators, maypole dancing is elegant and beautiful. For participants, especially children performing it for the first time, it can occasionally resemble a highly organized attempt to tie everyone into one enormous knot. Yet somehow, order usually emerges from the chaos, and the finished pattern is genuinely impressive. The exact origins of the maypole remain uncertain. Some historians believe it symbolizes trees and the renewal of nature, while others associate it with fertility and ancient woodland rituals. Whatever its original purpose, it has become one of the most recognizable images of the British spring. Flowers also play a starring role in May Day celebrations. Villages and towns are decorated with blossoms, wreaths, and greenery. Children traditionally gather flowers from hedgerows and gardens to create colorful displays. After a winter of bare branches, Britain's countryside suddenly bursts into color, giving everyone something new to admire besides puddles. Another much-loved tradition is the crowning of the May Queen. Usually chosen from local children or young people, the May Queen symbolizes youth, spring, and renewal. Wearing a beautiful white dress, floral crown, and carrying flowers, she often leads village processions and takes part in ceremonies celebrating the arrival of summer. Every small village seems to produce a May Queen with the confidence of royalty, and parents taking approximately 4,000 photographs. Then there is Morris dancing, another traditional feature of many May Day celebrations. Dancers wearing white clothing, colorful ribbons, bells around their legs, and waving handkerchiefs or clashing sticks perform lively folk dances, accompanied by musicians playing accordions, fiddles, or melodeons. To visitors seeing it for the first time, it can appear delightfully mysterious. To Britons, it simply means spring has officially arrived. Some May Day celebrations begin at sunrise. In places such as Oxford, crowds gather before dawn to hear the choir of Magdalen College sing from the top of the college tower. The tradition dates back centuries and welcomes the first morning of May with music overlooking the city. It is a beautiful experience, although it does require being awake at an hour many people usually associate with going to bed. Across rural Britain, village fêtes often accompany May Day. There are stalls selling homemade cakes, local crafts, plants, and preserves. Brass bands perform. Children compete in traditional games. Tea is served in generous quantities. Somewhere, there is almost certainly a raffle with a prize that includes a large hamper nobody expected to win. Food naturally finds its place in the celebrations too. Afternoon teas, homemade cakes, sandwiches, and traditional baked treats often feature prominently. It is one of Britain's unwritten rules that no community gathering is considered complete unless someone has baked a Victoria sponge. The arrival of spring also inspires people to spend more time outdoors. Parks, village greens, and gardens become gathering places after the long winter months. While the weather may still be unpredictable, Britons remain stubbornly optimistic. If the sun appears for more than 15 consecutive minutes, someone will confidently declare, "Looks like summer's here." Today, May Day continues to be celebrated across Britain, although the traditions vary from place to place. Some communities hold elaborate festivals, while others maintain simpler customs through schools, churches, and local organizations. Yet the central message remains unchanged. Celebrate new beginnings, enjoy the changing season, and bring people together. Perhaps that is why May Day has survived for so many centuries. It reminds us that after every long winter comes the promise of spring. It celebrates community, nature, music, and hope. And if that celebration happens to involve ribbons, dancing around a pole, people wearing bells on their legs, and an enthusiastic village brass band, well, that is simply Britain welcoming summer in its own wonderfully eccentric way.
Few things confuse tourists in Britain more than watching hundreds of people gather outside Buckingham Palace to witness what is, technically speaking, a very elaborate shift change. Yet every year millions of visitors stand shoulder to shoulder, holding cameras high above their heads, to watch soldiers in giant furry hats march around with astonishing seriousness, while brass bands play in the background. This is the changing of the guard, one of Britain's most famous royal traditions, and possibly the only military handover ceremony on earth, capable of causing traffic jams, selfie accidents, and mild international emotional breakdowns simultaneously. At first glance it looks like pure theatre, soldiers in bright red tunics, enormous black bearskin hats, polished boots, and perfect formations marching through London streets while tourists desperately try not to get in the way. But beneath all the pageantry lies a very real military duty. The guards are actual fully trained soldiers whose primary responsibility is protecting the monarch and the royal residences. The tradition itself dates back centuries. Ever since kings and queens require protection, soldiers have stood guard outside royal palaces. The formal ceremony we recognise today began developing during the 17th and 18th centuries as Britain's monarchy became increasingly associated with grand displays of ceremony and discipline. By the time Queen Victoria moved into Buckingham Palace in 1837, the ceremony had become firmly established as part of royal life in London. The basic idea is simple. One group of guards finishes its duty and another group takes over. In most countries, this would involve somebody checking a clipboard and going home early. Britain instead decided the process required military precision, orchestral music, immaculate uniforms, and enough ceremony to resemble the opening scene of a historical epic film. The guards themselves are usually drawn from elite regiments of the British Army, particularly the Household Division. These include famous regiments such as the Grenadier Guards, Coldstream Guards, Scots Guards, Irish Guards, and Welsh Guards. Each regiment has slight differences in uniform details, buttons, and plume colours. Details British royal enthusiasts can identify instantly, while normal tourists simply think, yes, definitely another man with a giant hat. And what hats they are! The famous bearskin hats can stand over 18 inches tall and weigh surprisingly heavily. Originally, they were designed after the defeat of Napoleon's Imperial Guard in the early 1800s. The towering hats made soldiers appear larger and more intimidating in battle. Today, their main tactical function appears to be making tourists ask, how do they not fall over? The guards are famous for maintaining complete discipline while on duty. They are trained not to react to distractions, conversations, or tourists attempting to make them laugh. Naturally, this has encouraged generations of visitors to do exactly that. Every day, somebody attempts a joke, strange dance, or exaggerated pose inches away from a motionless guard, hoping for a reaction. The guard usually responds by remaining perfectly still while silently radiating the energy of a deeply disappointed school headmaster. Contrary to popular belief, the guards are not forbidden from moving or speaking. In fact, if crowds become dangerous or people cross security barriers, the guards can become extremely vocal very quickly. Tourists occasionally discover this after wandering into the wrong place, while taking selfies, and suddenly hearing a terrifying yell echo across the palace courtyard. Music also became a major part of the ceremony over time. Military bands often accompany the changing of the guard, playing everything from traditional marches to surprisingly modern tunes. On some occasions, tourists expecting solemn royal music have instead heard film themes or pop songs drifting across the palace grounds, creating the surreal experience of soldiers marching in perfect formation to melodies nobody expected. The ceremony became world famous during the 19th and 20th centuries as Britain's empire, monarchy and tourism industry expanded globally. Images of the guards became symbols of Britain itself, alongside red telephone boxes, black cabs, rainy weather and apologising unnecessarily. Today, the changing of the guard remains one of London's biggest tourist attractions. Crowds gather hours early for the best viewing spots. Cameras flash endlessly. Entire family holidays become emotionally dependent on seeing at least one soldier march past successfully. And despite all the cameras, crowds and global attention, the guards themselves continue performing the ceremony with astonishing precision and discipline. Rain, heat, noise, chaos, none of it seems to matter. The soldiers march on regardless, with expressions suggesting they have transcended ordinary human concerns entirely, because at its heart, the changing of the guard represents something Britain has always loved: tradition, ceremony, discipline, and doing ordinary things in the most gloriously overcomplicated way imaginable. After all, if you are going to change shifts, you may as well do it with a marching band and a hat made from an entire bear.
If you ever wanted to witness Britain at its most British, look no further than Wimbledon. Every summer, for 2 glorious weeks, thousands of people gather to watch tennis played on immaculate grass courts, while consuming vast quantities of strawberries and cream. The weather is unpredictable, the queues are legendary, and half the country suddenly becomes an expert on tennis, despite not having touched a racket since a disappointing school sports lesson in 1987. Welcome to the Championships, Wimbledon, where sport, tradition, and polite obsession come together in a uniquely British fashion. Wimbledon is the oldest tennis tournament in the world. It began in 1877 at All England Lawn Tennis and Croquet Club, when a small group of enthusiasts organised a tournament to raise money for a broken roller used on the club's lawns. Few could have imagined that this modest sporting event would grow into the most prestigious tennis championship on earth. The first tournament attracted just 22 male competitors and a crowd of around 200 spectators. Today, millions watch worldwide, and winning Wimbledon is considered the ultimate achievement in professional tennis. Somewhere in those early days, however, somebody probably looked around and thought, "This seems like a nice local event." History had other plans. One reason Wimbledon stands apart from other sporting events is its remarkable commitment to tradition. While many tournaments have embraced dramatic changes over the decades, Wimbledon remains proudly old-fashioned. The courts are still grass, players still wear predominantly white clothing, officials still maintain standards so strict they can make a school headteacher seem relaxed. The famous all-white dress code dates back to Victorian times, when visible sweat stains were considered socially embarrassing. White clothing was thought to hide perspiration better. More than a century later, professional athletes from around the world still arrive, knowing that Wimbledon takes its colour rules extremely seriously. Somewhere, a player is always discovering that even slightly off-white is not quite white enough. The grass courts themselves are another defining feature. Unlike clay or hard courts, grass creates a faster and less unpredictable game. Maintaining these courts is a year-round task requiring extraordinary care. Groundskeepers nurture them with such dedication that the courts often look more perfect than many British gardens, golf courses, and occasionally entire villages. Then there is the weather. Wimbledon takes place during the British summer, a phrase that sounds reassuring until you experience it. Sunshine, rain, wind, clouds, and more rain can all occur within the same afternoon. For decades, rain interruptions became part of the Wimbledon experience. Matches would stop, covers would appear, and spectators would stare hopefully at the sky while pretending this was entirely normal. The construction of retractable roofs over Centre Court and Number 1 Court finally reduced the chaos, although many Britons secretly miss complaining about the weather. No discussion of Wimbledon would be complete without mentioning strawberries and cream. Every year, hundreds of thousands of portions are consumed during the tournament. The tradition dates back to the tournament's earliest years when strawberries were in season during the English summer and considered a luxurious treat. Today, eating strawberries and cream while watching tennis feels almost mandatory. It is entirely possible to attend Wimbledon without eating them, but many Britons would regard such behaviour with deep suspicion. The royal connection is another important part of Wimbledon's identity. Members of the royal family have attended for generations, and for many years players traditionally bowed or curtsied when members of the royal household were present in the royal box. Wimbledon's blend of sport, ceremony, and tradition makes it feel as much a national institution as a tennis tournament. The event has also produced some of the most dramatic moments in sporting history. Legends such as Björn Borg, John McEnroe, Pete Sampras, Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, Novak Djokovic, and Serena Williams have all graced its courts. British fans, meanwhile, spent decades desperately waiting for a home champion. That long wait finally ended in 2013, when Andy Murray won the men's singles title, becoming the first British man to achieve the feat since Fred Perry in 1936. The national celebration that followed was only slightly less emotional than a royal wedding. One of Wimbledon's most beloved traditions is the queue. In a nation already famous for standing in orderly lines, Wimbledon elevated queuing into an art form. Thousands of fans camp overnight for tickets, forming a queue so organised it has its own rules, stewards, and culture. For many people, surviving the Wimbledon queue is considered part of the experience. In some ways, it may actually be Britain's most competitive sport. Yet despite the global television audience, superstar athletes, and international fame, Wimbledon still feels distinctly British. The applause remains polite, the grounds are immaculate, the traditions endure, and somewhere in the crowd, somebody is balancing a bowl of strawberries while quietly complaining about the weather. Because Wimbledon captures something essential about Britain itself. It combines excellence with tradition, formality with passion, and world-class competition with a snack that would look perfectly at home at a village fete. After all, only Britain could turn eating strawberries, discussing rain clouds, and standing in a queue into part of one of the greatest sporting events on earth.
If there is one event that perfectly captures Britain's ability to turn a birthday celebration into a spectacular display of military precision, royal pageantry, and organised magnificence, it is trooping the colour. Most people celebrate their birthdays with a cake, a few presents, and perhaps an awkward rendition of Happy Birthday. The British monarch gets thousands of soldiers, hundreds of horses, military bands, cannon salutes, and a fly-past by the Royal Air Force. As birthdays go, it sets a fairly high standard. Trooping the colour is one of Britain's oldest and most impressive royal traditions. Held annually in London, the ceremony marks the monarch's official birthday rather than their actual birthday. This immediately raises the obvious question: why doesn't the monarch simply celebrate on their real birthday like everyone else? The answer lies in Britain's weather, which has spent centuries proving it cannot be trusted. The tradition of an official birthday dates back to the 18th century. Monarchs born during colder months often face the disappointing prospect of celebrating their birthday during rain, wind, fog, or conditions best described as character building. When George II, whose birthday fell in November, decided he preferred a large outdoor celebration during better weather, the idea of an official birthday parade was born. Britain essentially invented a second birthday because the first one had terrible weather. The roots of trooping the colour, however, stretch back even further. During the 17th and 18th centuries, military regiments carried colourful flags known as colours. These flags were vital on battlefields because they allowed soldiers to identify and rally around their unit amid smoke, confusion and chaos. Before a battle, officers would march the colour through the ranks so every soldier could recognise it. This ceremonial display became known as trooping the colour. Over time, the military exercise evolved into a grand public ceremony. By the 19th century, it had become firmly associated with the monarch's birthday celebrations and remains one of the most important events in the royal calendar. Today, the ceremony takes place on London's famous Horse Guards Parade near St James's Park. More than 1,400 soldiers, 200 horses and hundreds of musicians participate. Every movement is choreographed with astonishing precision. Boots shine, uniforms gleam, buttons sparkle. Somewhere in the crowd, tourists begin wondering whether every soldier was assembled in a factory. The soldiers involved are drawn primarily from the household division, the elite regiments responsible for protecting the monarch. These include the Grenadier Guards, Coldstream Guards, Scots Guards, Irish Guards and Welsh Guards. Each regiment takes turns presenting its colour during the ceremony. The uniforms themselves are among the most recognisable in the world. The scarlet tunics and towering bearskin hats have become symbols of Britain. The hats can weigh surprisingly heavily and stand nearly half a metre tall. Despite this, the soldiers march, turn, salute and perform intricate manoeuvres with remarkable accuracy. Most people struggle to walk normally after putting on a winter hat. These soldiers perform military drills while wearing what appears to be a small bear balanced on their heads. Music plays a central role throughout the event. Military bands perform traditional marches with such precision that even people who normally dislike marching music often find themselves impressed. The sound of hundreds of musicians playing together while cavalry units move across the parade ground creates an atmosphere that feels both historic and theatrical. The horses deserve special recognition too. Many of the mounted soldiers belong to the household cavalry and spend years training for ceremonial duties. These horses must remain calm amid crowds, loud music, cameras, aircraft and thousands of spectators. In many ways, they display more patience than most humans would under similar circumstances. One of the highlights is the monarch's inspection of the troops. Historically, monarchs often rode on horseback during the ceremony. Figures such as Elizabeth II rode regularly in earlier years before later inspecting troops from a carriage. Today, the monarch continues this tradition, reviewing the assembled soldiers with great ceremony. After the parade, the royal family travels along the Mall to Buckingham Palace, where thousands gather hoping to catch a glimpse of them. Then comes perhaps the most anticipated moment for many spectators, the famous balcony appearance. Members of the royal family step onto the palace balcony as crowds cheer below. Cameras click furiously. Television viewers watch around the world. Children wave excitedly. Adults attempt to identify every royal family member from several hundred meters away. Then the sky comes alive. The Royal Air Force conducts a spectacular flypast over central London. Modern fighter jets, transport aircraft, helicopters and the iconic Red Arrows soar overhead. The Red Arrows often leave trails of red, white and blue smoke across the sky, creating one of the most memorable images of the day. For many Britons, trooping the colour represents continuity. Generations have watched the ceremony through wars, social change, technological revolutions, and political upheaval. While the world constantly changes, this remarkable tradition endures, linking modern Britain to centuries of history. And perhaps that is the true magic of Trooping the Colour. It combines military excellence, royal ceremony, national pride, history, tradition, and a touch of theatrical spectacle in a way that only Britain could manage. Because when Britain decides to celebrate a birthday, it doesn't simply blow out candles. It deploys cavalry, marching bands, fighter jets, and half of London's ceremonial wardrobe.
There is something unmistakably British about the soft clink of china cups, the scent of freshly brewed tea, and a table covered with delicate cakes and warm scones. Afternoon tea may seem timeless today, but this elegant tradition actually began out of hunger. The story starts in the early 19th century, during the reign of Queen Victoria. At the time, many wealthy families ate only 2 large meals a day, breakfast and a very late dinner, often served as late as 8 o'clock in the evening. By the middle of the afternoon, a long stretch of hunger settled in. One woman decided enough was enough. That woman was Anna Russell, a close friend of Queen Victoria. Sometime in the 1840s, she began asking servants to bring her a tray during the late afternoon. On it would be tea, bread, butter and small cakes, just enough to satisfy the growing hunger before dinner. What began as a private habit soon became fashionable among the British upper classes. The Duchess started inviting friends to join her, and these small afternoon gatherings quickly turned into elegant social events. Soon wealthy ladies across Britain were dressing in fine clothes, gathering in drawing rooms and gardens, and enjoying long conversations over tea and delicate food. The menu itself became part of the ritual. First came finger sandwiches, thin slices of bread filled with cucumber, smoked salmon, egg or ham. Then came warm scones served with clotted cream and jam, followed by pastries, cakes and sweet treats, arranged carefully on tiered stands. And at the centre of it all was the tea itself, usually black tea poured from silver teapots into fine porcelain cups. By the late Victorian era, afternoon tea had become a symbol of sophistication and refinement throughout Britain. Grand hotels began offering luxurious tea services, many of which still continue today. Places like the Ritz London became world famous for turning afternoon tea into a lavish experience, complete with chandeliers, live piano music, and impeccable service. But despite its aristocratic origins, afternoon tea slowly spread beyond the wealthy elite. Tea itself had already become Britain's national drink, enjoyed by factory workers, families, sailors and shopkeepers alike. Over time, the idea of having tea became woven into everyday British life. Even today, the tradition survives in many forms. Some people still enjoy formal afternoon tea in luxury hotels, while others simply gather with friends over a pot of tea and a slice of cake. Across Britain, tea remains more than just a drink. It is comfort, routine, hospitality and conversation. And perhaps that is why afternoon tea has endured for nearly 2 centuries, because in a fast-moving world, there is still something comforting about stopping for a moment, pouring a cup of tea and sharing food and conversation with others.
If Christmas Day is Britain's annual festival of overeating, family arguments and falling asleep in front of the television, then Boxing Day is the moment the nation wakes up, looks at the presents it received 24 hours earlier and collectively decides it needs more stuff. Welcome to Boxing Day, Britain's most enthusiastic shopping tradition, where millions of people voluntarily leave warm houses, full stomachs and comfortable sofas in pursuit of discounts they didn't know they needed until 5 minutes ago. The first thing many people get wrong is the name. Contrary to popular belief, Boxing Day has absolutely nothing to do with boxing. No heavyweight championship takes place. Nobody climbs into a ring to fight over discounted kettles. Although, judging by some shopping crowds over the years, that has occasionally come close. The origins of Boxing Day stretch back several centuries. Traditionally, December 26th was a day when wealthy households would give Christmas boxes to servants, tradespeople, and those less fortunate. These boxes often contained money, food, gifts, or leftover festive treats. After working hard to help wealthy families celebrate Christmas Day, servants would finally receive their reward and often return home to spend time with their own families. Churches also played a role. Donation boxes used to collect money for the poor were often opened on December 26th, with the contents distributed to those in need. In many ways, the original Boxing Day was less about spending money and more about giving it away. Naturally, modern society looked at this noble tradition and thought, what if we turned it into a giant shopping event? By the 20th century, particularly after the Second World War, Boxing Day began evolving into one of Britain's biggest retail occasions. Department stores started offering major discounts to clear Christmas stock, and shoppers quickly embraced the idea. Before long, Boxing Day sales became almost as much a part of Christmas as mince pies and questionable festive jumpers. The psychology behind it is fascinating. After weeks of buying gifts for everyone else, people suddenly found themselves surrounded by money, gift cards, unwanted presents, and the realization that the television they wanted was now 30% cheaper than it had been on Christmas Eve. Retailers understood this perfectly and prepared accordingly. For decades, Boxing Day mornings produced remarkable scenes across Britain. Long before online shopping existed, determined bargain hunters would queue outside shops before dawn. Some arrived in darkness. Some brought flasks of tea. Others appeared to possess military-level planning skills. Entire operations were organised around obtaining discounted electronics, clothing, furniture, or anything else with a red sale sticker attached. The queue itself became a uniquely British spectacle. Thousands of people stood patiently in line, waiting for stores to open. The moment the doors unlocked, however, the atmosphere occasionally shifted from polite restraint to Olympic-level competitive shopping. Britain spent most of the year teaching people to queue properly, and then dedicated one day to testing that commitment. Department stores became the epicenters of Boxing Day excitement. Shoppers navigated packed aisles, searching for bargains while attempting to avoid collisions with fellow customers, pushing enough shopping bags to qualify as freight vehicles. Somewhere in every store, somebody was proudly purchasing something they had never considered buying until they saw the discount. Of course, not everyone participates. For many Britons, Boxing Day has always been about relaxation. It is a day for leftover turkey sandwiches, family visits, football matches, and recovering from Christmas itself. Entire households spend the day eating festive leftovers while watching television and wondering whether it is socially acceptable to have another mince pie before noon. Sport also became closely associated with Boxing Day. Football fans across Britain flock to stadiums for traditional holiday fixtures. Horse racing events attract large crowds. Families gather around televisions to watch sport while continuing the national mission of consuming every remaining festive calorie before New Year's resolutions arrive. The rise of internet shopping transformed Boxing Day once again. Instead of standing outside stores in freezing weather, millions of people now begin their bargain hunting from the comfort of their sofas. The modern Boxing Day sale often starts online before Christmas has even finished. Some people are browsing discounts while still digesting Christmas dinner. Retailers have adapted, extending sales over days or even weeks. Yet despite these changes, the spirit of Boxing Day remains surprisingly similar. It is still a day of opportunity, excitement, and perhaps just a little bit of retail temptation. Across the wider Commonwealth, Boxing Day remains important in countries such as Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and others that inherited the tradition from Britain. Each has developed its own version, but the idea of post-Christmas celebrations and sales remains familiar. Today, Boxing Day sits at a curious crossroads between old and new Britain. Its origins lie in charity, generosity, and community. Its modern form involves discounted televisions, online shopping baskets, and people convincing themselves they have saved money by spending more of it. And perhaps that is the true genius of Boxing Day. It begins as a tradition about giving to others, and somehow ends with Britain buying another air fryer because it was too good a deal to miss.
If Britain has a living room, it is probably the local pub. Long before social media, smartphones, coffee chains, and neighborhood WhatsApp groups, Britons had already invented a place where people could gather, exchange gossip, discuss politics, celebrate victories, mourn defeats, complain about the weather, and occasionally remember why they came in. That place was, and still is, the pub. The British pub is far more than somewhere to buy a drink. It is a community centre, meeting place, debating chamber, dining room, sports venue, unofficial town hall, and sometimes the location where someone insists they are just having one, before emerging 4 hours later with 3 new friends and a slightly ambitious plan for the future. The word pub is actually short for public house, and its origins stretch back nearly 2,000 years. The word pub is actually short for public house, and its origins stretch back nearly 2,000 years. The story begins when the Romans occupied Britain. As they built roads across the country, they established roadside taverns and inns where travelers could rest, eat, and drink. The Romans eventually left, but Britain's appreciation for places serving refreshments remained firmly intact. During the Middle Ages, alehouses began appearing throughout towns and villages. These were often ordinary homes where local residents brewed ale and sold it to neighbours. Because drinking water was not always reliable, ale was frequently safer to consume than water. Imagine explaining to someone today that the healthiest option in your village was the beer. By the time coaching inns appeared across Britain, pubs had become essential parts of daily life. Travellers needed places to sleep, merchants needed places to conduct business, and locals needed somewhere to discuss absolutely everything happening in the village. The pub filled all these roles simultaneously. Many historic pubs proudly claim extraordinary ages. Some have operated for hundreds of years. A few even claim origins stretching back close to 1,000 years. In Britain, it is entirely possible to enjoy a drink in a building older than many countries. Some pubs have witnessed monarchs rise and fall, wars begin and end, and countless generations arguing over who forgot whose round it was. The names of British pubs are traditions in themselves. Across the country you'll find pubs called the Red Lion, the Crown, the King's Head, the White Hart, the Swan, and countless others. Historians believe many of these names originated from royal symbols, local landmarks, heraldry, or important historical events. To modern visitors, however, it can occasionally feel as though Britain named half its pubs by pulling random animals and colours from a hat. One of the most sacred elements of pub culture is the buying of rounds. In many British pubs, groups take turns purchasing drinks for everyone. It sounds simple, but it involves a surprisingly complex system of honour, memory, mathematics, and social pressure. Forget your turn, and people may remember for years. Some family disputes have probably lasted less time than arguments over unpaid rounds. The pub quiz is another beloved institution. Every week, teams gather armed with pens, snacks, and wildly exaggerated confidence. Participants arrive convinced they possess vast stores of general knowledge, only to discover they cannot remember the capital of a country they visited last year. Somehow, the team that appeared least prepared often wins. Sport and pubs have also become inseparable companions. Whether it's football, rugby, cricket, tennis, or practically any major sporting event, pubs transform into emotional roller coasters filled with cheers, groans, celebrations, and dramatic declarations that the referee clearly requires professional assistance. Entire friendships have been strengthened, tested, and occasionally endangered by watching sport in a pub. Food became an increasingly important part of pub culture during the late 20th century. Traditional pub meals such as fish and chips, steak and ale pie, bangers and mash, Sunday roasts, and ploughman's lunches evolved from simple fare into culinary institutions. Today, some pubs serve food that rivals fine restaurants, while others proudly specialize in portions large enough to feed a small medieval army. The pub garden deserves special mention. The moment Britain's temperature rises above approximately 18 degrees Celsius, entire populations migrate outdoors. Pub gardens suddenly fill with people celebrating what may be one of the 3 sunny afternoons available that year. Sunglasses appear. Optimism flourishes.
Somebody inevitably claims, this could be the start of a great summer, despite decades of evidence suggesting otherwise.
Rural village pubs often serve as the beating heart of their communities. They host charity events, local meetings, celebrations, birthdays, wedding receptions, and festive gatherings. In many villages, the pub remains one of the few places where people of different ages and backgrounds regularly meet, face to face. Urban pubs perform a similar role, offering a place where office workers, students, families, tourists, and locals can share the same space. They provide something increasingly rare in modern life, an environment where strangers can become acquaintances and acquaintances can become friends. Of course, every pub has its own personality. Some are cozy and quiet, with crackling fireplaces and low wooden beams. Others are lively and bustling, filled with conversation and laughter. Some appear unchanged since Victorian times. Others embrace modern styles. Yet all share the same essential purpose, bringing people together. Today, British pub culture faces challenges from changing lifestyles, rising costs, and evolving social habits. Yet, despite predictions of decline, pubs remain deeply woven into Britain's identity. Today, British pub culture faces challenges from changing lifestyles, rising costs, and evolving social habits. Yet, despite predictions of decline, pubs remain deeply woven into Britain's identity. They continue to provide companionship, conversation, community, and a place to escape everyday life for a while. Because at its heart, the British pub is not really about the drink. It's about the stories told, the friendships made, the laughter shared, and the feeling of belonging. And if those stories become slightly more entertaining with every retelling, well, that's just part of the tradition.
If there is one British Christmas tradition capable of confusing visitors, terrifying shy audience members, and making adults shout at actors in public without embarrassment, it is the pantomime. Every winter, theatres across Britain fill with families ready to watch a strange festive spectacle involving fairy tales, outrageous costumes, terrible jokes, audience participation, cross-dressing, singing, dancing, and at least one person shouting, "He's behind you." To anyone unfamiliar with the tradition, it can feel less like a theatre performance and more like organised festive madness. The modern British pantomime, often shortened simply to panto, has roots stretching back hundreds of years. Its origins can be traced to Italian commedia dell'arte, a form of travelling theatre that featured exaggerated characters, slapstick comedy, and audience interaction. These ideas gradually found their way to Britain during the 17th and 18th centuries, where they mixed with music hall entertainment, fairy tales, and British humour to create something uniquely bizarre. By the Victorian era, pantomimes had become one of the biggest events of the Christmas season. Families flocked to theatres to see lavish productions based on familiar stories such as Cinderella, Aladdin, Jack and the Beanstalk, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, and Dick Whittington. The stories themselves were often simple, but nobody was really attending for the plot. They were there for the jokes, songs, chaos, and the chance to laugh at things that made very little sense. One of the most famous traditions is the pantomime dame. This is a comic female character traditionally played by a man in exaggerated makeup, outrageous dresses, and enough glitter to be visible from space. Characters such as Widow Twankey in Aladdin or the Ugly Sisters in Cinderella have become legendary figures in British theatre. The bigger the wig, the louder the costume. and the more ridiculous the performance, the better. At the same time, many pantomimes traditionally cast the principal boy, the young male hero, as a woman. So in a typical pantomime, the hero is played by a woman, the older women are played by men, and nobody finds this remotely unusual. Britain simply accepts it as part of Christmas. Audience participation is perhaps the defining feature of pantomime. Unlike most theatre, where audiences are expected to sit quietly and behave themselves, pantomime actively encourages shouting. The villain appears and everyone boos, the hero arrives and everyone cheers. Characters ask questions directly to the audience, children scream warnings, adults join in enthusiastically, entire theatres become giant conversations. And then comes the famous line. Somewhere during the performance, a character fails to notice the villain sneaking up behind them. The audience immediately erupts. He's behind you. The actor looks around. No, he isn't. The audience shouts louder. Oh yes, he is. The actor insists. Oh no, he isn't. This exchange may continue for several minutes, despite everyone in the building already knowing exactly where the villain is. Somehow, it never gets old. Pantomimes are also famous for their jokes, many of which operate on multiple levels. Children laugh at the silly slapstick and visual comedy. Adults laugh at the hidden double meanings and topical references slipped into the script. The result is a rare form of entertainment where grandparents, parents, and children can all laugh at completely different jokes simultaneously. Over the years, pantomimes have attracted some surprisingly famous performers. Actors, comedians, television presenters, singers, and soap stars regularly appear in Christmas pantomimes. In Britain, appearing in a panto is often seen as a badge of honour. If you're famous enough, sooner or later someone will probably ask if you'd like to wear a giant wig and be chased around the stage by children. Music plays a huge role too. Modern pantomimes often include popular songs, dance routines, and elaborate musical numbers. Sometimes these fit naturally into the story. Other times the plot pauses completely, so everybody can sing a chart hit from 6 months ago. Nobody questions it because it's Christmas. Even as television, streaming services, and digital entertainment have transformed family life, pantomime has survived remarkably well. Every year, theatres across Britain still fill with excited audiences, eager to boo villains, cheer heroes, and shout themselves hoarse. For many families, attending the local pantomime remains as much a part of Christmas as decorating the tree or eating too many mince pies. And perhaps that is the secret of pantomime's enduring popularity. It doesn't ask people to sit quietly and admire great art. It asks them to join in, laugh, sing, shout, and become part of the performance itself. Because only Britain could look at a fairy tale, add terrible jokes, impossible costumes, audience heckling, cross-dressing, pop songs, and complete chaos, and decide that was the perfect way to celebrate Christmas.
There are few sounds more likely to signal the arrival of Christmas in Britain than the distant sound of carol singers bravely battling freezing temperatures, unpredictable weather, and occasionally a neighbour who answers the door looking mildly alarmed. Carolling is one of Britain's oldest and most cherished Christmas traditions, a festive custom that combines music, community spirit, and the remarkable British ability to stand outdoors in December while insisting they are not that cold. To outsiders, the idea can seem rather unusual. A group of people gather together, learn a selection of songs, and then voluntarily spend winter evenings singing them in public. Yet for generations of Britons, Christmas simply would not feel complete without hearing familiar carols echoing through churches, village squares, schools, and neighbourhood streets. The origins of carolling stretch back far beyond Christmas itself. The word carol originally referred to a type of medieval song accompanied by dancing. During the Middle Ages, carols were sung throughout the year to celebrate many different occasions. They were lively, communal, and often performed in public gatherings. Christmas eventually became the season most closely associated with them, and over time, festive carols evolved into a tradition of their own. By the medieval period, Christmas celebrations across Britain often included singing in churches and communities. However, not all authorities were enthusiastic about the practice. During the 17th century, When the Puritans temporarily gained power in England, many Christmas celebrations were discouraged or even banned. The Puritans considered festive singing, feasting, and merrymaking to be rather too enjoyable for their liking. Fortunately for Christmas enthusiasts, the ban did not last. When Christmas traditions returned, carol singing quickly regained its popularity. Britain collectively decided that singing festive songs was far too much fun to abandon. Many of the carols we recognize today became famous during the Victorian era. The 19th century witnessed a huge revival of Christmas traditions. Influenced by writers such as Charles Dickens, who helped popularize the warm and family-centered image of Christmas, carol singing experienced a golden age. Collections of traditional songs were published, new carols were composed, and communities embraced festive music with enthusiasm. Some Christmas carols have become so deeply embedded in British culture that many people know every word without remembering when they learned them. Songs such as Silent Night, Hark the Herald, Angels Sing, O Come, All Ye Faithful, Away in a Manger, and We Wish You a Merry Christmas are instantly recognizable across the country. The opening notes alone can trigger powerful memories of school concerts, candle-lit services, and childhood Christmases. Churches remain at the heart of many caroling traditions. Across Britain, Christmas carol services draw large congregations during December. Candlelit services are particularly popular, with churches illuminated by hundreds of flickering candles, while choirs perform traditional hymns. Even people who rarely attend church during the rest of the year often make an exception for Christmas carols. There is something about festive music, candlelight, and centuries of tradition that proves difficult to resist. Then there is the tradition of door-to-door caroling. Groups of singers visit homes, performing carols on doorsteps and in neighborhood streets. Historically, this was sometimes linked to charitable fundraising, with donations collected for local causes, churches, or community organizations. Today, many groups continue the practice, helping to spread festive cheer while raising money for good causes. Of course, the quality of the singing can vary dramatically. Some carol groups sound like professional choirs descended directly from heaven. Others sound more like enthusiastic relatives attempting karaoke after Christmas lunch. Fortunately, enthusiasm has always been considered more important than perfection. Christmas caroling is one of the few activities where singing slightly out of tune can actually add to the charm. School nativity plays and Christmas concerts have introduced generations of children to carols. Across Britain, parents have spent decades squeezing into overcrowded school halls to watch children sing festive songs, while desperately searching for their own child somewhere among a sea of tea towels, shepherd costumes, and angel wings. Weather has always played a starring role in British caroling. The popular image involves snow gently falling while singers gather beneath glowing street lamps. The reality often involves drizzle, numb fingers, and a determined effort not to drop the sheet music into a puddle. Nevertheless, Britons continue singing. A little rain has never been allowed to interfere with Christmas traditions. Caroling also serves an important social purpose. It brings communities together. People who might otherwise never meet gather to sing the same songs, support local charities, and share in a collective celebration. In an increasingly digital world, the simple act of standing side by side and singing remains surprisingly powerful. Today, Christmas carols are heard everywhere. They fill shopping centers, schools, churches, concert halls, television programs, and public events throughout December. Some people adore them. Others claim to be tired of hearing them by the second week of the month. Yet somehow, when Christmas finally arrives, most Britons would feel something was missing without them. Because caroling is about far more than music. It is about tradition, community, memory, and the shared experience of Christmas itself. It connects modern Britain to centuries of festive celebrations and reminds people of the simple joy of coming together. And perhaps that is why caroling endures. Because once a year, Britain decides that the best way to celebrate Christmas is to gather friends, brave the cold, sing songs written centuries ago, and hope the neighbors appreciate the effort, even if they were watching television at the time.
Every year on the 5th of November, Britain does something wonderfully confusing for outsiders. Families gather in freezing parks and muddy fields to watch fireworks explode overhead while standing beside enormous bonfires, eating sausages, burnt burgers, and potatoes wrapped in foil. Children wave sparklers dangerously close to each other's faces, while adults pretend this is perfectly safe. And at some point during the evening, someone always says the same sentence: "Remember, remember the 5th of November." Even if nobody can remember the rest of the poem. Bonfire Night, also known as Guy Fawkes Night, is one of Britain's strangest traditions because it is essentially a national celebration of a failed terrorist plot from over 400 years ago. Most countries would probably let that sort of thing fade quietly into history. Britain instead responded by turning it into fireworks, snacks, and organised chaos. The story begins in 1605 during the reign of James VI of Scotland and First of England. England at the time was deeply divided by religion. Catholics faced severe restrictions under Protestant rule, and tensions were boiling beneath the surface. A group of Catholic conspirators decided drastic action was needed. Their plan was breathtakingly extreme: blow up the entire Houses of Parliament during the state opening of Parliament while the King and political leaders were inside. Yes, Britain's biggest autumn family event is based on an attempted explosion of the government. The plot became known as the Gunpowder Plot. The conspirators secretly rented a cellar beneath the Palace of Westminster and filled it with barrels of gunpowder. Their explosives expert was a man named Guy Fawkes, who was tasked with lighting the fuse. Unfortunately for the plotters, somebody talked. An anonymous letter warning a Catholic lord to stay away from Parliament reached authorities, and during a midnight search on November 5th, Guy Fawkes was discovered guarding 36 barrels of gunpowder beneath the building. Britain had come alarmingly close to losing its entire government in one explosion. The conspirators were arrested, and the plot failed spectacularly. King James survived, Parliament survived. Guy Fawkes did not have a particularly good week afterwards. The reaction across England was immediate celebration. Bonfires were lit throughout London as people rejoiced that the King had survived. Parliament soon declared November 5th an annual day of Thanksgiving, and before long, bonfires became a yearly tradition across the country. Over time, the celebrations evolved into something far stranger and louder. Effigies, homemade stuffed figures called guys, were burned on bonfires to represent Guy Fawkes himself. Children would drag these figures through the streets, asking for a penny for the guy, essentially early British fundraising mixed with light public menace. Somewhere along the line, fireworks were added because apparently ordinary fire was not dramatic enough. Today, Bonfire Night feels like a mixture of historical remembrance, community festival, and mild survival challenge. Entire towns gather in parks to watch huge firework displays while standing in temperatures cold enough to question every life decision. British people insist this is enjoyable, despite losing feeling in their fingers by 7 p.m. The food is also an essential part of the tradition. Bonfire Night menus often include toffee apples capable of removing dental work, baked potatoes, hot dogs, treacle toffee, and mugs of tea desperately clutched for warmth. Every parent spends half the evening warning children not to stand too close to fireworks while simultaneously handing them flaming sparklers. Somehow, Britain survives this annually. Different parts of Britain develop their own versions of the celebration. The town of Lewes in Sussex became famous for hosting some of the largest and most chaotic bonfire night processions in the country, complete with flaming crosses, costumes, drums, and giant bonfires that look suspiciously like scenes from a medieval uprising. The tradition has also taken on broader meaning over the centuries. For some, Bonfire Night represents rebellion, political protest, or anti-establishment spirit. The image of Guy Fawkes himself later became globally famous thanks to the graphic novel and film V for Vendetta, where his stylized mask became an international symbol of protest movements. And yet, despite all the history, politics and religious conflict behind it, modern Bonfire Night in Britain is mostly about community. Families gather, children stare at fireworks in awe, teenagers pretend they are not cold while absolutely freezing. Dogs across the nation question why. the sky has suddenly declared war on them, because somehow Britain looked at a 17th century assassination attempt and collectively decided, you know what this needs? Fireworks and sausages.
If there is one evening each year when Scotland proudly combines poetry, food, history, music, and enough whiskey to make even the most confident public speaker suddenly believe they are a philosopher, it is Burns Night. Held every year on the 25th of January, Burns Night celebrates the life and works of Scotland's national poet, Robert Burns, a man whose influence on Scottish culture remains so enormous that more than 2 centuries after his death, people still gather annually to eat haggis and recite his poetry. Not many writers can inspire a global celebration involving bagpipes, formal speeches, and sheep's stomach. That is a level of literary achievement few authors ever reach. Robert Burns was born in 1759 in Alloway. Although he lived only 37 years, he produced poems and songs that became central to Scottish identity. Works such as Auld Lang Syne, sung around the world every New Year's Eve, remain among the most recognised pieces of poetry ever written. Burns wrote about love, friendship, politics, nature, ordinary people, and the human condition, often using the Scots language that gave his work its distinctive voice and charm. When Burns died in 1796, admirers feared his legacy might fade. Instead, quite the opposite happened. In 1801, a group of his friends organised a dinner in his honour, gathering to remember the poet, read his works, and enjoy traditional Scottish food. The evening proved such a success that it evolved into an annual tradition. More than 200 years later, Burns suppers are held not only throughout Scotland but across the world, wherever Scots and lovers of Scottish culture gather. A traditional Burns Night supper follows a remarkably structured programme. This is not simply dinner. It is a carefully choreographed celebration where every course, speech and toast has its place. For first-time visitors, the event can feel like a cross between a literary festival, a formal banquet, and a wonderfully organised excuse to enjoy whiskey. The evening often begins with guests gathering while bagpipe music fills the room. Bagpipes have a unique ability to command attention. It is almost impossible to ignore them. Whether you love the sound or find it slightly alarming, once the pipes begin, everyone knows something important is happening. Then comes the star of the evening, the haggis. For those unfamiliar with Scottish cuisine, haggis is a savoury pudding traditionally made from sheep's offal mixed with oats, onions, spices and suet, all historically cooked inside a sheep's stomach. This description has frightened tourists for generations. Yet many who actually try haggis are pleasantly surprised to discover it is rich, flavourful and rather delicious. The arrival of the haggis is treated with extraordinary ceremony. Guests stand as the dish is carried into the room, often accompanied by a piper. The haggis may receive more applause than some wedding couples. The meal itself usually includes neeps and tatties, mashed turnips and potatoes, alongside the haggis. Whiskey frequently accompanies the proceedings. In fact, whiskey appears so regularly throughout the evening that many attendees begin speaking about literature with steadily increasing confidence. Poetry readings form another important part of Burns Night.
Guests recite some of Burns's best-known works, celebrating both his humour and his insights into life.
Burns possessed a remarkable ability to move effortlessly between comedy, romance, social commentary, and heartfelt emotion. One moment, guests may be laughing at a witty verse. The next, they are reflecting on profound observations about humanity. Music is also central to the celebration. Many of Burns's poems were written as songs, and performances often feature traditional Scottish music.
By the end of the evening, entire rooms may be singing together, sometimes with impressive skill and sometimes with admirable enthusiasm.
One of the most famous parts of the Burns supper is the immortal memory speech. This toast reflects on Burns's life, achievements, and lasting influence. Speakers often combine biography, humour, and admiration, reminding audiences why Burns remains such a beloved figure more than 2 centuries after his death.
Another long-standing tradition is the Toast to the Lassies, a humorous speech celebrating women, followed by a reply from a female guest. These exchanges have evolved considerably over time and today are often playful, witty, and full of good-natured banter.
What makes Burns Night remarkable is how it balances formality and fun. There are traditions, rituals, and speeches, yet the atmosphere remains warm, lively, and welcoming. People gather not merely to honour a poet, but to celebrate Scottish culture itself, its language, music, humour, hospitality, and sense of community. Burns Night has spread far beyond Scotland. Celebrations take place in countries across the globe, from Canada and Australia to New Zealand and the United States. Wherever Scots settled, they often carried Burns Night with them. Today, Burns Night remains one of the world's most unusual literary celebrations. It honours a poet not through quiet reading alone, but through food, music, friendship, laughter, and shared tradition. Because only Scotland could decide that the best way to celebrate great literature is to march a haggis into a room behind a bagpiper, recite poetry to it, stab it dramatically, raise a whiskey toast, and then spend the rest of the evening singing. And honestly, it is hard to imagine Robert Burns wanting it any other way.
Few British traditions leave foreign visitors more confused than Morris dancing. Imagine walking through a quiet English village on a sunny afternoon and suddenly hearing bells jingling in the distance. You turn a corner and discover a group of adults wearing white, clothes, ribbons, flowers and hats, enthusiastically waving handkerchiefs and hitting sticks together while accordion music plays nearby. Nobody explains what is happening. Everyone else acts like this is perfectly normal. Welcome to Morris dancing, Britain's most gloriously baffling folk tradition. To outsiders, Morris dancing often looks like what might happen if medieval villagers collectively lost a bet. But beneath the jingling bells and energetic hopping lies a tradition that stretches back hundreds of years, deeply rooted in English folklore, village celebrations, and community life. The exact origins of Morris dancing remain mysterious, which somehow makes it even more British. Historians believe forms of the dance may date back to the late Middle Ages, possibly arriving in England during the 15th century. Some theories suggest the name Morris may come from the word Moorish, referring to exotic dances from Spain or North Africa that fascinated Europeans at the time. Others argue nobody really knows, which is often the most honest answer in British history. What is certain is that Morris dancing became strongly associated with rural England, especially village festivals, spring celebrations and seasonal gatherings. In farming communities, the dances were often performed to celebrate the arrival of warmer weather, successful harvests, or local holidays. Essentially, Morris dancing was Britain's original village entertainment long before television, football, or arguing online existed. The costumes are one of the tradition's most recognisable features. Morris dancers typically wear white clothing decorated with colourful ribbons, flowers, waistcoats and hats covered in feathers or rosettes. Around their legs are strapped rows of small bells that jingle loudly with every step. The effect is somewhere between cheerful folk celebration and a herd of festive reindeer approaching at speed. Then come the handkerchiefs and sticks. Different styles of Morris dancing use different props. Some groups wave white handkerchiefs dramatically through the air, while others clash wooden sticks together rhythmically. Nobody entirely agrees what these originally symbolised. Some believe the handkerchiefs were linked to ancient fertility rituals or warding off evil spirits. Others suspect villagers simply realised waving things around made the dancing look more exciting. Music plays a central role too. Traditionally, Morris dancers perform to live folk music played on accordions, fiddles, melodeons, concertinas, pipes or drums. The tunes are lively, repetitive and surprisingly catchy. Even people who claim not to enjoy Morris dancing often find themselves accidentally tapping their feet before quickly pretending they are not. Over the centuries, different regional styles developed across England. The Cotswold style is perhaps the most famous, featuring graceful movements and handkerchief waving. Border Morris from the Welsh border regions tends to be louder, wilder, and occasionally involves painted faces that make the dancers look like cheerful medieval bandits. Northwest Morris developed in industrial towns and often resembles a strange hybrid of folk, dancing, and marching parade. By the 19th century, Morris dancing was beginning to decline as industrialisation transformed Britain. Rural village life changed dramatically and many traditional customs started disappearing. For a while, Morris dancing risked fading into history completely. Then came the Great British Folk Revival. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, folklorists and enthusiasts travelled across the countryside, recording old dances, songs and traditions before they vanished forever. One of the most important figures was Cecil Sharp, who helped preserve many Morris traditions by documenting dances and teaching them to new generations. Thanks to these efforts, Morris dancing survived and eventually experienced a revival. Today, Morris dancing remains a proud part of British folk culture. Groups, known as sides, perform at village fetes, pubs, festivals, parades and public events across the country. Some dancers take the tradition extremely seriously, preserving ancient routines with military precision. Others simply enjoy the music, community spirit and excuse to wear bells on their knees without being arrested. Modern Morris dancing has also become more diverse and playful over time. Women's sides became increasingly common during the 20th century. Mixed groups now perform widely, and some newer Morris groups embrace humour, gothic styles, punk influences, or outright theatrical chaos. Britain naturally found a way to make Morris dancing even stranger, and yet, despite all the jokes people make about it, Morris dancing represents something important. It connects modern Britain to its rural past, to village greens, seasonal celebrations, local identity and centuries of shared tradition. It is joyful, communal, eccentric and proudly old-fashioned in the best possible way. Because Morris dancing captures a very British truth, if you are going to dance in public wearing bells and waving handkerchiefs, do it confidently enough that nobody dares question you.
Every November, something remarkable happens across Britain. For 2 minutes, one of the busiest, noisiest and most stubbornly talkative nations on earth falls completely silent. Cars stop, crowds stand still, conversations pause. Even people who can barely stay quiet through a television advert somehow manage to remain silent together. This is Remembrance Sunday, one of Britain's most solemn and meaningful traditions. A day dedicated to honouring the men and women who lost their lives in war and military service. Unlike many traditions that revolve around food, celebrations or colourful festivities, Remembrance Sunday is rooted in reflection, gratitude and memory. It is a tradition that asks people to pause, look back at history and remember the immense sacrifices made by generations who served their country. The origins of Remembrance Sunday lie in the aftermath of the First World War, one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. When the guns finally fell silent on the Western Front, the armistice agreement came into effect at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918. After 4 years of unimaginable destruction, the fighting had finally stopped. The scale of the war's impact was almost impossible to comprehend. Millions had been killed, wounded, or affected by the conflict. Virtually every town, city and village across Britain had lost sons, fathers, brothers, friends and neighbours. Communities needed a way to remember those who never returned home. In 1919, George V introduced the first national 2-minute silence. At exactly 11 a.m, Britain stopped. Factories paused, shops fell quiet, traffic halted. The silence provided a moment for collective reflection and remembrance. More than a century later, that tradition continues. One of the most recognisable symbols of Remembrance Sunday is the red poppy. Its story comes from the battlefields of Belgium and northern France, where poppies were among the first flowers to grow on disturbed ground after the fighting. The image became famous through the poem In Flanders Fields, written by Canadian military doctor John McCrae. The poem begins with the famous words, "In Flanders fields, the poppies blow." Those simple lines transformed the poppy into an international symbol of remembrance. Today, Millions of people across Britain wear paper poppies on their coats during November. They appear everywhere. On television presenters, football managers, politicians, school children, bus drivers, and even the occasional dog wearing a commemorative bandana. The annual Poppy Appeal, organised by the Royal British Legion, raises funds to support veterans, serving personnel and their families. The familiar sight of volunteers selling poppies has become as much a part of November as falling leaves and complaints about the weather. Remembrance. Sunday itself takes place on the Sunday closest to Armistice Day, allowing communities across the country to gather and participate in ceremonies. The largest national event occurs at the Cenotaph in London. The word cenotaph means empty tomb, and the monument serves as a focal point for national remembrance. Each year, members of the royal family, political leaders, military representatives, veterans, and thousands of spectators gather there. Wreaths of poppies are laid. Military bands play solemn music. Buglers perform the haunting last post, a call that has become synonymous with remembrance. Then comes the silence. For 2 minutes, central London becomes astonishingly still. In a city famous for traffic, noise and constant movement, the quiet feels almost unreal. It is one of the few occasions when millions of people deliberately stop what they're doing at exactly the same moment. Across the country, similar ceremonies take place at local war memorials. Nearly every British town and village has one. These memorials often bear long lists of names, ordinary people from the community who served and never returned. Families still visit them today, sometimes finding the names of grandparents, great-grandparents, or relatives they never had the chance to meet. Schools also play an important role in remembrance. Children learn about the world wars and the sacrifices made by earlier generations. For many young people, Remembrance Sunday becomes their first introduction to the human stories behind historical events. It transforms history from dates in a textbook into real lives and real experiences. The tradition has evolved over time to honour not only those who died in the First World War, but also those who served in the Second World War and subsequent conflicts. Veterans from many generations participate, representing military service across decades of history. One of the most moving aspects of Remembrance Sunday is its universality. People from different political views, backgrounds, religions and generations often come together in shared respect. The day is not about celebrating war, quite the opposite. It is about recognizing the cost of war and remembering those who paid that cost. Humour, naturally, takes a back seat during Remembrance. Yet there is something quietly British about the way the nation approaches the occasion. There is no grand display of emotion expected, no requirement for speeches from every participant. Instead, there is dignity, respect, and a belief that sometimes silence speaks louder than words. And perhaps that is why Remembrance Sunday remains so powerful. In a world filled with noise, argument, and constant distraction, it asks millions of people to do something simple. Stop, reflect, and remember. For 2 minutes, the nation stands still. And in that silence, generations of sacrifice are honoured, not forgotten.
If Wimbledon is Britain's most famous summer sporting tradition, village cricket is arguably its most charming. There is something wonderfully British about spending an entire afternoon watching a sport that can last all day, occasionally pause for tea, and still end with people arguing about what exactly happened. To many outsiders, cricket can appear baffling. The rules seem complicated, the matches can be incredibly long, and players often spend hours standing in a field waiting for something exciting to happen. Yet for generations of Britons, cricket has been more than just a sport. It is a summer ritual, a social occasion, and for some, practically a way of life. Cricket's origins stretch back to at least the 16th century in southern England. Historians believe it began as a children's game before gradually becoming popular among adults. By the 18th century, it had evolved into one of Britain's favourite sports, attracting spectators from every level of society. From village greens to grand stadiums, cricket became woven into the fabric of British life. The sport eventually spread across the globe through the British Empire, taking root in countries such as India, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and Pakistan. Today, cricket is followed by hundreds of millions of people worldwide, but many still associate its spirit with the English village green, where it first flourished. Village cricket occupies a special place in British culture. Across the country, during summer weekends, teams gather on picturesque grounds, surrounded by churches, rolling countryside, old stone cottages, and occasionally grazing sheep. Some grounds are so beautiful they look less like sports venues and more like scenes from a postcard. A typical village cricket match often feels as much a social event as a sporting contest. Families bring picnic baskets, spectators sit in folding chairs, children run around the boundary, dogs chase balls they have absolutely no intention of returning. Meanwhile, players attempt to maintain concentration amid all the distractions. Then there is the weather. British cricket and British weather have been locked in a complicated relationship for centuries. A match can begin under glorious sunshine, continue through clouds, pause for rain, resume in sunshine, and end in drizzle. Players become amateur meteorologists, studying the sky with the seriousness of climate scientists. Few phrases are heard more often on a cricket ground than "it looks like it's clearing up." One of the most famous traditions in cricket is the tea break. While many sports pause for tactical discussions or hydration, cricket stops so participants can enjoy tea, sandwiches, cakes, biscuits, and other refreshments. The sight of players spending part of a sporting event discussing Victoria sponge cake is peak British culture. In village cricket, the tea can become almost as important as the result. Some clubs have developed legendary reputations for their cakes. There are fierce but friendly rivalries over who provides the best cricket tea. Entire seasons may pass without agreement on whether the lemon drizzle cake was superior to the chocolate sponge. The game's terminology adds another layer of charm. Cricket features words and phrases that sound completely normal to enthusiasts but utterly bewildering to newcomers. Silly mid-on, fine leg, googly, yorker, chin music, duck, night watchman. A person hearing these terms for the first time could reasonably conclude they had wandered into a particularly strange conversation. Cricket has also produced some of Britain's greatest sporting rivalries. None is more famous than the Ashes, contested between England and Australia. The rivalry began in 1882 after Australia defeated England on English soil. A mock obituary declared that English cricket had died and the body will be cremated and the ashes taken to Australia. More than a century later, the two nations continue battling over a tiny urn that has become one of sport's most famous trophies. The game has produced legendary figures over the years. Players such as W.G. Grace, Ian Botham, Shane Warne, Sachin Tendulkar and Ben Stokes have become household names among cricket fans. Their achievements are discussed with the same reverence that others reserve for great artists or historical figures. Perhaps the most British aspect of cricket is its emphasis on sportsmanship. The phrase "it's not cricket" entered the English language as a way of describing behaviour that is unfair or dishonest. For generations, the sport has been associated with ideals of fair play, respect and integrity, even if players occasionally become rather competitive when the match is on the line. Summer cricket also inspires a powerful sense of nostalgia. For many people, memories of the sport are tied to long sunny afternoons, the sound of leather-striking willow, church bells in the distance, and the gentle murmur of spectators chatting beside the boundary. It evokes a vision of Britain that feels timeless, even if the weather rarely cooperates. Today, cricket continues to evolve. Modern formats such as 2020 have introduced faster-paced matches and attracted new audiences. Yet village cricket remains remarkably unchanged. Every summer, thousands of amateur players pull on their whites and head to local grounds to continue traditions that have endured for centuries. Because village cricket is about far more than winning or losing.
There are many things Britain has given the world: the Industrial Revolution, Shakespeare, the telephone, and somehow, despite the weather, optimism about summer. But perhaps Britain's greatest achievement of all is the queue. Not a law, not a government system, not even officially taught in schools. And yet every British person somehow emerges into adulthood instinctively knowing exactly how to stand in a line and silently judge anyone who does it wrong. Queuing in Britain is not merely waiting, it is a deeply spiritual experience held together by quiet resentment, personal space, and passive aggression. Nobody knows exactly when the British obsession with orderly lines truly began, but historians often trace it back to the Victorian era and the rise of industrial cities. As Britain's population exploded during the Industrial Revolution, crowded streets, train stations, markets and factories created chaos everywhere. People quickly realised society worked far better when everyone waited their turn rather than charging forward like medieval peasants, fighting over bread. Over time, queuing became associated with fairness, patience and social order, three things the British value enormously, even while pretending not to care. The queue quietly evolved into an unwritten social contract. You wait your turn, everyone else waits theirs. Nobody causes a scene, and if someone cuts in line, the punishment is immediate. Dozens of people staring at them with the concentrated disappointment of an entire nation. The remarkable thing is how silent British queues usually are. In many countries, waiting in line involves conversation, movement, negotiation, or visible frustration. In Britain, people simply stand there, quietly, motionless, sometimes for extraordinary lengths of time. Nobody knows how long the queue will take. Nobody asks questions. The British simply accept their fate, like monks entering a sacred ritual of mild inconvenience. And yet beneath the calm surface lies enormous emotional tension. A British person may wait patiently for 20 minutes without complaint, but if someone skips the queue, society instantly enters DEFCON 1. Entire crowds begin exchanging horrified glances. Somebody sighs loudly. One brave pensioner may mutter, "Excuse me, there's a queue." At this point, the offender usually realises they have violated one of Britain's highest social laws and retreats in shame. During the Second World War, queuing became even more deeply embedded into British identity. Food rationing meant long queues formed outside shops daily as people waited for meat, bread, sugar and tea. Wartime propaganda celebrated patience and fairness, reinforcing the idea that standing properly in line was practically an act of patriotism. The message was simple: civilization survives when everyone waits their turn for potatoes. The British queue also comes with highly complex unwritten rules that nobody explains, yet everyone somehow understands. You must never stand too close to the person in front. You must acknowledge newcomers with a quick glance confirming who is last. If confusion breaks out over who arrived first, the participants will usually apologise to each other for several minutes before anyone moves. Then there is the great supermarket queue psychology experiment. A British person will carefully choose what appears to be the fastest checkout lane, only to watch in horror as somebody ahead begins searching for vouchers, writing a cheque from 1987, or attempting to pay entirely in loose change, discovered at the bottom of a handbag. The queue instantly becomes a test of emotional endurance. Public transport queues are equally sacred. At bus stops across Britain, people instinctively line up even when no markings exist. Airports become giant international studies in queue behaviour, with British travellers becoming visibly uncomfortable whenever foreign crowds gather in less organised ways. Somewhere deep in the British soul exists the belief that a proper queue may be the final barrier between civilization and complete societal collapse. Even modern technology has not killed the tradition. Virtual queues, online waiting rooms and digital ticket systems somehow still produce the same emotional reactions. The British will calmly stare at a screen saying, "You are number 4082 in the queue," as though this is perfectly normal human behaviour. But queuing is ultimately about more than politeness. It reflects something central to British culture, the desire for fairness, order and quiet coexistence. The queue says everyone gets their turn, nobody gets special treatment, and we will all suffer this inconvenience together in respectful silence. And honestly, for Britain, that may be the closest thing there is to national unity.
If you ever find yourself wondering whether Britain occasionally invents traditions simply to confuse the rest of the world, allow us to introduce cheese rolling. Every year, perfectly sensible adults travel to a very steep hill, watch someone throw a large wheel of cheese down it, and then voluntarily hurl themselves after it at alarming speed. Medical professionals sigh, spectators cheer, and somewhere a health and safety officer quietly considers a career change. Welcome to the wonderfully bonkers tradition of cheese rolling. The world's most famous cheese rolling event takes place at Cooper's Hill, near the village of Brockworth, every year during the late May bank holiday. Thousands of spectators gather from across Britain and around the world to witness one of the most extraordinary sporting, or perhaps surviving, events ever devised. No one knows exactly when the tradition began. Some historians believe it stretches back several hundred years, while others suggest it may have pagan origins linked to celebrating the arrival of spring or confirming common grazing rights on the hill. Like many ancient British customs, its exact beginnings are a mystery. What is not a mystery is that somebody looked at an impossibly steep hillside and thought, this would be much more interesting if we added cheese. The rules are astonishingly simple. A round of double Gloucester cheese, weighing around 3 to 4 kilograms, is released from the top of the hill. Competitors wait only a moment before charging after it. The first person to reach the bottom of the hill wins the cheese. Notice something important there. The winner is not the first person to catch the cheese. That would be almost impossible. The cheese can reach speeds of over 70 miles per hour, far faster than any human can run. Within seconds, it is bouncing wildly down the hillside, leaving competitors tumbling, rolling, sliding, and occasionally questioning every decision that led them to this moment. Cooper's Hill itself is the true challenge. The slope is incredibly steep, with gradients in places approaching 45 degrees or more. Running down it under control is almost impossible. Most competitors discover that gravity has entirely different plans. Spectators quickly learn that what begins as a race often transforms into a spectacular display of unplanned gymnastics. Feet leave the ground, arms flail dramatically. People somersault, cartwheel, bounce and roll towards the finish line. If elegance were part of the judging criteria, nobody would ever win. Remarkably, despite the chaos, competitors return year after year. Many describe the experience as exhilarating, unforgettable and slightly painful, all at the same time. The event has become internationally famous. Television crews from around the world travel to Gloucestershire to film what many viewers initially assume must be some kind of comedy sketch. They soon realize, usually with growing disbelief, that this is a genuine annual tradition involving entirely real people making entirely voluntary decisions. Over the years, competitors from countries including Australia, New Zealand, United States, Canada and many others have travelled to take part. Britain may have invented cheese rolling, but its wonderfully ridiculous appeal has become global. The prize itself remains refreshingly modest. The winner receives the cheese. No giant cheque, no luxury sports car, no £1 million sponsorship deal, just a wheel of double Gloucester and the lifelong satisfaction of knowing you successfully outran dozens of people while mostly falling over. Because of the steep hill and frequent injuries, safety has always been a major concern. Over the years there have been broken bones, sprains, bruises and countless spectacular tumbles. Ambulance crews, volunteer medics and local rescue teams are always on hand, fully aware that gravity tends to win more races than the competitors. At various times, official organisers attempted to cancel or discourage the event because of safety concerns. The public response was wonderfully British. People simply turned up anyway. Today, although the race has changed in organisation over the years, thousands still gather annually on Cooper's Hill. The crowds lining the slopes often outnumber the competitors many times over. Families picnic nearby, photographers prepare their cameras, and first-time visitors stare at the hill wondering whether everyone involved has collectively lost their minds. The atmosphere is surprisingly cheerful. There is laughter, encouragement, community spirit, and an unmistakable sense that everyone is participating in something completely unique. It is one of those rare traditions where winning is almost secondary to simply surviving the descent with a smile. Cheese rolling has also become a symbol of Britain's wonderfully eccentric character. In a country famous for royal ceremonies, ancient castles, afternoon tea and orderly queuing, it provides a welcome reminder that the British also possess a delightfully mischievous sense of humour. After all, this is a nation that looked at a dangerously steep hillside, added a runaway cheese, invited hundreds of enthusiastic volunteers to chase it, and somehow turned the whole thing into an internationally celebrated tradition. Because only Britain could transform dairy products' gravity and questionable decision-making into one of the world's most entertaining annual festivals. And somehow everyone can't wait to do it all again next year.
Few meals are more deeply woven into British life than the Sunday roast. Across Britain, the smell of roasting meat, crisp potatoes, rich gravy, and vegetables drifting through the house on a Sunday afternoon has become a ritual that generations instantly recognize. It is more than just a meal. It is tradition, routine, family gathering, and comfort, all served on one plate. The origins of the Sunday roast stretch back centuries, reaching deep into medieval England. In small villages and towns, Sundays were closely tied to church attendance. Families would spend the morning at church services before returning home to prepare the main meal of the week. Because Sunday was often considered a day of rest, it became one of the few occasions when families had time to cook large meals slowly over open fires or in communal ovens. By the 15th century, roast beef had already become strongly associated with England, so much so that the English themselves were sometimes nicknamed les rosbifs by the French, literally meaning the roast beefs. Large cuts of beef roasted over open flames became a symbol of prosperity and national pride. During the reign of Henry VII, his royal guards were even reportedly nicknamed Beef Eaters, a title that later became forever linked with the ceremonial guards at Tower of London. But the Sunday roast truly became part of everyday British life during the Industrial Revolution. For working-class families in rapidly growing cities, meat was expensive and often reserved for special occasions. Sunday became the day when families could gather around their best meal of the week. A joint of beef, lamb, pork or chicken would be slowly roasted while potatoes cooked in dripping fat beneath the meat, soaking up flavour and becoming the crispy roast potatoes now considered essential to the meal. Yorkshire pudding soon joined the tradition, especially in northern England. Originally designed as a cheap filler food for poorer families, it was made from a simple batter of flour, eggs and milk, baked beneath roasting meat to catch the dripping fat. Over time, it became one of the most beloved parts of the meal itself. In Yorkshire, serving roast beef without Yorkshire pudding is still considered almost criminal. Vegetables became another staple of the roast dinner plate. Carrots, peas, parsnips, cabbage, Brussels sprouts and cauliflower cheese all found their place depending on the season and region. Then came the gravy, thick, rich and poured generously over everything. In many British households, arguments over the perfect gravy recipe are almost as traditional as the meal itself. Pubs and inns also helped cement the Sunday roast as a national institution. By the 19th and 20th centuries, families across Britain began visiting local pubs after church for a roast dinner, a tradition that continues today. Many British pubs still advertise Sunday carvery boards outside, offering diners huge plates piled high with meats, vegetables, stuffing and gravy. Different parts of Britain developed their own variations. In Scotland, roast lamb and tatties often took centre stage. In Wales, lamb became particularly popular due to the country's farming heritage. Across England, regional preferences emerged between beef, pork, chicken or turkey, often accompanied by local sauces like mint sauce, horseradish, applesauce or bread sauce. Even as modern life became busier, the Sunday roast survived. For many families, it remained one of the last regular moments when everyone sat together around the same table. Grandparents, parents and children would gather weekly, sharing stories, arguments, laughter and far too many potatoes. Today, the Sunday roast remains one of Britain's most recognisable traditions. Whether served in a countryside pub, a city restaurant or a family kitchen, it continues to represent warmth, togetherness and comfort. And while the rest of the world may see it as simply meat and potatoes, to many Britons, the Sunday roast is practically a sacred weekly ceremony. Because in Britain, no matter how modern life becomes, there will always be something special about a Sunday afternoon. A crowded table and someone asking the most important question of all, who wants more gravy?
If there is one night of the year when Britain collectively agrees that staying awake until midnight is not only acceptable, but practically compulsory, it is New Year's Eve. Across the United Kingdom, millions gather in homes, pubs, town squares and city centres to say goodbye to the old year and welcome the new one with fireworks, laughter, music, and enough countdowns to make everyone glance nervously at their watches every few minutes. But while England, Wales and Northern Ireland celebrate New Year's Eve with parties and fireworks, Scotland takes things to another level entirely. There, New Year's Eve is known as Hogmanay, a celebration so important that it has become one of Scotland's greatest cultural traditions. But while England, Wales and Northern Ireland celebrate New Year's Eve with parties and fireworks, Scotland takes things to another level entirely. There, New Year's Eve is known as Hogmanay, a celebration so important that it has become one of Scotland's greatest cultural traditions. If Britain throws a party, Scotland throws a festival. No one knows for certain where the word Hogmanay comes from. Historians have suggested French, Norse, Gaelic, and even Anglo-Saxon origins. Whatever its beginnings, the tradition itself stretches back hundreds of years and may even contain elements of ancient Viking midwinter festivals, when Norse settlers welcomed the return of longer days with feasting, fire, and celebration. Long before fireworks illuminated the night sky, people believed that fire had special powers to drive away evil spirits and cleanse the old year. Bonfires, blazing torches, and flaming processions became common features of winter celebrations. Even today, many Scottish towns continue these dramatic fire festivals, creating spectacular sights that seem part history lesson and part fantasy film. One of the world's most famous Hogmanay celebrations takes place in Edinburgh. Every year, hundreds of thousands of visitors gather for concerts, fireworks, torchlight processions, and street parties that transform Scotland's capital into one enormous celebration. The fireworks exploding above Edinburgh Castle have become one of the most iconic New Year's images anywhere in the world. Elsewhere across Britain, fireworks have become synonymous with New Year's Eve. As midnight approaches, gardens, parks, riversides, and city skylines burst into dazzling displays of color. Families gather outside wrapped in coats and scarves, pretending they are perfectly comfortable despite temperatures suggesting otherwise. Then comes the countdown. 10, 9, 8. Suddenly everyone is shouting numbers with complete strangers. By the time 0 arrives, hugs are exchanged, glasses are raised, fireworks fill the sky, and someone inevitably forgets the words halfway through the next tradition. That tradition, of course, is singing Auld Lang Syne. Written by Scotland's national poet Robert Burns, the song has become one of the world's most recognizable New Year's anthems. Millions of people sing it every year, despite many admitting they only confidently know the first verse. After that, the performance often becomes an enthusiastic blend of humming, smiling, and hoping everyone else knows the words. Another uniquely Scottish tradition is first footing. According to custom, the first person to cross the threshold of a home after midnight brings good luck for the coming year. Traditionally, the ideal first footer was a tall, dark-haired man carrying small gifts such as coal, bread, salt, shortbread, or whiskey. Each gift symbolized something important: warmth, food, prosperity, hospitality, and good fortune. If your first visitor arrived carrying whiskey rather than empty hands, they were almost guaranteed a warm welcome. Today, first footing survives in many Scottish communities, although the gifts are often more symbolic than practical. Few modern households urgently require someone to arrive with a lump of coal, but the gesture continues to represent kindness, friendship, and wishing neighbors well for the year ahead. Food naturally plays a starring role in New Year's celebrations. Buffets overflow with sandwiches, sausage rolls, mince pies, cheeses, cakes, and enough snacks to feed considerably more people than actually attend. Every host somehow worries there won't be enough food, despite having prepared enough to sustain a small expedition. Drinks also flow freely, with champagne often reserved for midnight. Yet many families are equally happy welcoming the new year with tea, coffee, or hot chocolate. After all, Britain's relationship with kettles remains strong regardless of the calendar. Television has also become an important part of the evening. Families gather to watch live countdowns, comedy specials, musical performances, and the famous chimes of Big Ben marking the arrival of the new year. For many, hearing those 12 deep bell strikes simply wouldn't feel like New Year's without them. New Year's resolutions are another well-loved tradition. Every January, millions of Britons solemnly promise to exercise more, eat more healthily, save money, become more organized, or finally clear out that cupboard they have been avoiding since 2018. Remarkably, these promises are often made while enjoying another slice of cake just minutes after midnight. The optimism is admirable. The statistics are less encouraging. Around Britain, different communities have developed their own unique customs. Some host torchlight parades, others organize fireworks over rivers or castles. Coastal towns sometimes celebrate with New Year's Day swims, where brave, or perhaps slightly frozen, participants plunge into icy seas for charity or simply for the experience. Observers generally agree that watching from the shore with a warm drink is the wiser option. At its heart, New Year's Eve is about far more than fireworks and parties. It is a moment of reflection, hope, and new beginnings. It encourages people to celebrate friendships, family, community, and the exciting possibility that the coming year might be even better than the last. Perhaps that is why Hogmanay and New Year's Eve remain such treasured traditions, because for one magical night each year, millions of people pause between the past and the future, raise a glass together, sing a centuries-old Scottish song with varying degrees of accuracy, welcome friends across their doorsteps, and look forward with hope. And if the first visitor also brings whiskey, well, that's considered an excellent start to the new year indeed.
And that's the wonderfully strange story behind one of Britain's favourite traditions. If you enjoyed this trip into the weird and wonderful side of British life, make sure to subscribe, share the video, and ring that notification bell, because next time we're diving into another tradition that will make the rest of the world say, wait, the British actually do that.
Britain is stranger than you think.